Welcome back to GBNAmerica. I'm Alona Braverman, and welcome to the third debate of our series, The Future of America. Today's topic, crime. President Trump has promised to crack down on the growing crime epidemic and restore law and order to the country, including a revival of stop and frisk practices, expanding the force of law enforcement officers, and even pursuing the death penalty for drug traffickers. Here to debate the possible benefits of Trump policies promising to make America safe again are Rich Giardino, former New York State judge and prosecutor, welcome, and here is Democrat strategist Robert Patillo. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. So Rich, let me start with you. Tell us about some of the key components of Trump's intended crime policy, and what are the most effective ones you think, and what will really turn the tide in America?
Well, I think you've got to step back and look at the current situation we're in and how we got here. We are experiencing nationwide problems in recruitment and retention of police officers. So, what you have is less police officers on the street, and you have less experienced police officers on the streets. So, that has reduced our ability to, let's say, solve more crimes. We just saw the technology in the case of Mr. Thompson, who was gunned down on a New York City street because he was involved in healthcare as a CEO. And they had cameras all over the place, and they tracked the shooter and eventually found him by the old-fashioned method. Somebody recognized his picture. So there's a lot going on. And I think what President Trump has talked a lot about is stemming the illegal immigration, in particular those individuals who were either criminals from other countries, mental health problems from other countries, or gang members that are infiltrating at least 17 states this newest gang is in, but a lot of drugs are filtering through. Now, most of the people who come over the border are not here with illicit intentions, but the president has steadfastly stated that he wants to reverse the tide and deport immigrants. I think that's key thing is deporting first those who commit crimes in our country, and then secondly, those with criminal records from other countries. I think that like Mario Cuomo used to say, you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. And I think President Trump is a big picture fella, and he talks in big, broad strokes about deporting illegal immigrants. That's one part of it. The second part is I think he's going to restore more support for law enforcement. Right now, we've been inundated for 4 years with defund the police, attacks of being over policing, and over policing comes from the phrase that we go into minority communities and end up arresting a disproportionate amount of minorities. But the studies in Baltimore, Chicago, and other inner city areas show that the minority members of those communities want more police, but they want better policing. So they're not opposed to having more law enforcement to protect their families and to protect their neighborhoods. They just want it done in a more fair way, so they don't feel they're being improperly targeted. So I think that you'll see an effort to restore faith in the police. You'll see more resources to the federal government to assist locals, and you will see the deportation start, like I say, with criminals, and go from there. And although it's a crime to enter the country illegally, I think the criminals the president wants to get rid of is those that are committing crimes and hurting people in this country, drug trafficking, and also transporting minors for sex and things of that nature.
Robert, what say you?
Well, I think there's a couple of issues that we have in addressing what the Trump policy is going to be towards crime. One, the numbers don't match the rhetoric, and we live in a media cycle where if it bleeds, it leads. So there's all these images telling people that crime is getting worse in America, every single statistic that has come out over the course of the last 4 years says that crime has not just gone down in America, it has plummeted in America over the course of the last 4 years. If you look at the homicide rate, if you look at the number of violent crimes committed in major cities, if you look at the number of arrests being made, the number of convictions, etc., that many of these police reform efforts, these judicial reform methods, have been exceedingly effective in reducing the crime rates and in particular reducing the levels of violent crime. So on the one hand, we have what the numbers and statistics tell us. On the other hand, you have the lived experiences in major cities and in communities around the country where they say what we are feeling does not reflect those numbers. And when President Trump talks about these issues, I think we have to figure out how we can have a balance between keeping many of the reform methods that have been working, but also cracking down, as we said, on drug traffickers, cracking down on people who commit violent crimes, and also investing in our mental health and our drug treatment system in this country. Right now, if you have a mental health issue, the place you go for treatment is prison. If you have a drug issue in America, if you're not rich, the place you go is prison. And that's primarily in poor, low income, and minority communities, because if you're wealthy, you go to rehab. Black folks would love to get the Hunter Biden treatment. Minority communities in this country would love to have shot after shot, chance after chance, opportunity after opportunity. And then if you mess up, you get a pardon. But in lieu of that, we have to instill a system where we are not simply over criminalizing people because of their demographics, but we're not going back to stop and frisk, which was an amazingly ineffective policy, that we're not saying we're going to pardon police officers who beat or kill Black people. You can kind of understand as a Black person why saying I'm going to have a policy of pardoning people who beat and kill Black folks might be an issue for some communities. So I think we can come to common sense solutions that support all those efforts, but also where we're not simply locking up people writ large in order to solve a systemic issue. Putting people in jail does not reduce the number of people using drugs. We see that across the country. So having smart policy is that has to be next along the line.
I agree with Robert 100%. We need to do more for mental health and substance abusers because we see so much of our crime is caused by individuals' mental health conditions. If you go, I operate a jail, a correctional facility at a local level, and the majority of people in my correctional facility are substance abusers or addicted to drugs or alcohol. And I also have a lot of mental health issues. And the only place they get treatment, the ones who get incarcerated in our community, is in jail. So I agree with Robert on that aspect. But one of the reforms that has taken place is this bail reform movement across the country. And what that did was take the teeth out of a very effective program that started under Janet Reno as Attorney General and Bill Clinton. And that was the drug treatment courts. And drug treatment courts was set up to take individuals whose primary problem was substance abuse, drugs and or alcohol, who committed crimes to sustain their drug addiction or when they were high. And what the drug courts did was they said, you're either going to jail or you're going inpatient treatment and then outpatient treatment. Once they took bail off the table and anyone can commit anything up into a B nonviolent felony in my state, New York, those individuals, we don't have the stick to say, the coercive purpose to say, you're going to go into treatment or you're going to jail. And it worked for many people. And it was very successful while they were in treatment, and it was a way of getting them in. So that changed. I also agree with Robert is that I think most people in this country want their families safe. Most people want their children to go to school in a safe environment, but most people also want their kids to be able to go out and play in the playground or on their front lawn. And when we always hear like about active shooters, they don't discuss the young children being shot by drug buys from drug dealers in the inner cities. And those kids' lives are just as precious, and they deserve just as much protection as having school resource officers in schools. We've got to do more to protect the communities where the violence is spiking. So I also disagree. I do disagree with Robert on one point. I don't believe in the statistics because we know that only 2/3 of law enforcement agencies are actually reporting to the FBI on the statistics. In 2021, they changed from uniform crime reports to incident-based reporting system. So if a local agency doesn't report or doesn't report properly, they're skewed. And so what they do is they have another system called victim-based reporting. And the victim-based reporting is supposed to give you a better understanding. But we're finding that a lot of people do not report crimes and do not answer the surveys. So it's always a projection. And we just saw in this last election that polling and projections don't really mean a lot. It doesn't give you the true picture of what's going to happen or what is happening. So I do think that the perception we see every day with people being shot on the street, children being beaten up for sneakers, and there was a Washington D.C. A couple of weeks ago, three kids, 17, 18, and 19, jumped a 16-year-old and his friend and beat them up to take their sneakers because they were Nike or some basketball brand sneakers. And I mean, those are things that people read about and see, and that solidifies their belief that crime maybe is greater than what's actually seen. But isn't that what it's about? Because if you don't feel safe, all your other rights really don't matter.
I do
Well,
want to.
this is.
Oh,
Mhm.
sorry. I
Well,
just.
just really quick, real quick, just to respond. That's what it's say. Well, one on the issue of bail reform. That look, when I was 20, I got arrested. I worked at Home Depot, and they accused me of stealing a toolbox. It turned out it was the other black guy there who stole the toolbox. It wasn't me. But they took me to jail that night, and they booked me in. And if it wasn't for the fact that I was released on a no bond status, I would have missed class the next day. I probably would have failed out of college. I would have never gone to law school. I wouldn't be sitting here right now because of those issues. So while I understand having that carrot and stick approach to things, we have to look at the real lives of people and how it can ruin people's future. Not having the ability to get out of incarceration when you're not guilty of the crime you've been accused of. And when you get arrested, it's very much like getting abducted by aliens. If you don't get a bond and you're in there for 30 days, your apartment's gone, your car is gone, your job is gone, your credit score is probably destroyed for the next 20 years because of that. So we have to look at the human elements and remember that these people are innocent until proven guilty, and holding them in a condition where they can't afford to get out is no different than rendition.
Okay. I do want to ask this question to both of you because it's so fresh in our minds. This is, you know, the verdict came out. Daniel Penny was acquitted in manslaughter in New York. Former Marine in New York came to the aid of his fellow passengers on the subway. They felt threatened. They felt like that they were in danger. Is what they said in the trial, in the testimony. I'm going to pose this to each one of you. What is your takeaway from how this case went down and how this case concluded? Rich, I'll start with you.
Well, Robert, why don't you go first? Because Robert has some insight different than my insight, and I think it's easier to have him start, and then I can play off of that and let him know my opinions and why.
Well, on that point, I understand the young man in question, Mr. Penny, the veteran. I come from a military family. He wanted to step in to help. But I think the message that we have to have for the public is call the police if you feel in danger. Because when we start encouraging these sorts of vigilante justice to take place, Mr. Neely, from what we understand, the individual who was killed, suffered from mental health conditions, suffered from drug abuse conditions, have been arrested many times before. We have societally have to invest in ensuring that he can get the help that he needs. And we've become too comfortable in America with walking over people laying in the streets in this country. We're seeing people who are less fortunate, who are not able, and considering them in many cases to be less human than we are. And once we get to that place, we can't just start saying in America that if you're scared, you can strangle hobos. That's not what we want to do in this country. And it creates a very dangerous situation because I know people who were at one point in time completely normal functioning members of society and who now have gone through mental health breakdowns, drug addiction, and they're suffering in the streets. We have to get them the help they need. And it's saying that the solution is vigilante justice, I think, metastasizes the problem, where we're going to have more people, more lone wolves out there who think that they're doing the right thing, think they're helping out, and we can start seeing this become the new normal, and this is just not who we are as Americans.
I appreciate that, but it's not practical when you're on a subway to call the police. Many people testified in the trial that they were scared. One woman said she'd been riding the subways for 30 or 40 years and she'd never been that scared in her life. People who've ridden the subway know what it's like when someone starts ranting and raving. You don't want to look at them, you want to look away. and if the person picks you as the target, and most of it is mental health. But one thing that's upset me, I think it's an accurate verdict. I think it was a right verdict under self-defense and justification, and I think Mr. Penny was trying to protect the other individuals on the train. But one thing I do disagree with is the fact that I don't believe it was a racial situation. The families and Black Lives Matter were protesting out in front. And after the verdict, the father of Mr. Neely said the system failed his son and failed their family. And also that Mr. Penny, it's a small world. So he makes a threat right outside of court after the verdict, which does not stop the cycle of the concern about vigilante justice. And I don't think of vigilante justice as defending people on that subway. But the other point that's important is the system did fail Mr. Neely. The system failed Mr. Neely because in over his 40 arrests, everyone knew that half of those were because of mental health issues. And the system doesn't have enough counselors, doesn't have enough resources. So what they would do is put him in jail for short periods of time. They wouldn't get him mental health. So in that regard, more money needs to be invested in mental health services to break the cycle of mental health and criminality. And I believe, and there was a good op-ed piece this morning, I believe that Mr. Neely's family and father should have advocated more for mental health treatment services for his son along the way. I understand that Mr. Neely testified when he was a child that a boyfriend had killed his mother in front of him. And so he grew up in a violent household, exposed to it, so you can understand where a lot of his mental health issues come from. But society, if there was a failure in the criminal justice system or society, it was because they didn't do enough for his mental health in preventing him from being in a position where he could go onto a subway, rant and rave, and scare people enough that they felt that they needed to be protected. So I agree with Robert on that we definitely need more services.
Well, this is part of what I say. We have to have more law enforcement. So if you do feel you're in danger, that there will be a conveniently located person who will be able to address those issues. Because let's say in this situation, Mr. Penny, who was trying to subdue the individual, let's say that Mr. Neely was actually a violent and deranged criminal who was armed. You have now created a situation by trying to be a vigilante where you not only endanger Mr. Penny and Mr. Neely, but everyone else on that train. Let's not pretend that people in New York don't have illegal guns, and you might turn a situation of somebody ranting and raving into a mass shooting event because we're trying to interfere in things that just aren't our place to interfere in. And if we get into this place where we say if someone's ranting and raving and feeling dangerous, that we can essentially have lone wolves detain them or step into that law enforcement place, then we're setting a very dangerous precedence. There's a reason that we have law enforcement. That I agree. We need to be investing in those mental health systems. We need to be investing in our law enforcement system. But part of that comes with making sure that we are prioritizing those as a society.
Yeah, you can't give police 2 days of training in police academy on mental health and expect them to solve the problems. One thing when I taught law school and college, I would always say, the criminal justice system is a reflection of the failures of every other system, including the criminal justice system. Meaning that if you come from a broken home, if you come from an educational system that doesn't educate you, whether you want to be involved or you yourself don't get involved, our social services fail you, our mental health and medical system fails you, and even the criminal justice fails you, you end back up in the criminal justice system. So there's plenty of other areas that these people should be taken care of before they get there. And even the criminal justice system has failures, and that's why they get returned over and over. But the one thing I will say, and I think President Trump, back to the original question, I think President Trump probably would share this view that I have. My view is we're the only profession that you ambush us, you shoot bottle rockets at us, you throw frozen bottles of water at us, you call us pigs, you said fry them up like bacon, and then you call 911, and law enforcement across this country said, what's your name, what's your problem, where do you need us, what's your emergency? They don't say what's your race, how do you identify, what's your religion, what's your politics. They say what's your emergency, and they go. Very few professions would do that. So we put a lot on our police officers every day. We want them to be mental health experts. We want them to be substance abuse counselors. We want them to be family counselors. And then we send them out with not enough training because there's not enough time to give them the degrees that they need to do the training that would make a difference.
Um, I want to throw something as a final question out to both of you, and that's about quite a revolutionary thing that President-elect Donald Trump has suggested, which is to give the death penalty to drug traffickers. I want to throw that question to both of you, and whether you think that that is even a feasible policy in the United States, and whether it's an effective one. Rich, we'll start with you.
Well, first of all, the current status of the law is if I sell drugs to you and you overdose and die, in most states on the state level, that's not a crime because people know that drugs are poison and you could die, you could get sick from drugs. So it's not a crime if I buy drugs from a seller and I die, it's on me. I think right now we do have statutes that say if they intentionally know that they're doing a hot load or they're overdosing somebody, that they could be charged with homicide in some level. I don't know what parameters would be. I haven't heard any parameters of who would get the death penalty. I think that major drug dealers who knowingly invade or mix their drugs with things like fentanyl that are going to kill people and they know it, that should be looked at for severe penalties. But we don't even, many states don't even use a death penalty on child rapists, murderers. So I don't know how far that would get. But I think the intent is he's trying to express that the major punishment should be for people who are poisoning and killing kids and people in this country.
Well, on that point, one, the death penalty should be abolished, but that's a completely different topic for another day. There's absolutely no evidence that the death penalty stops anybody from doing any crime known to mankind. Most people know that killing people is wrong, and the folks who committed aren't thinking about, well, I might get life versus getting the chair when they're doing that
I
killing.
agree.
Secondarily, if we're going to go after drug traffickers, are we going after Pfizer? Are we going after Moderna? Are we going after Big Pharma and the drugs that they are trafficking? Are we giving their CEOs the death penalty for the opioid epidemic that killed so many families? Are we simply saying we're going to have a war on poor people who are trafficking drugs and we're going to start executing them because they traffic a different kind of drug than the cartels that are the Big Pharma are trafficking? Hey, sugar is a drug. Are we going to start going after the sugar industry for all the people who are dying of diabetes and heart disease? So it gets ridiculous pretty quickly when you start going down this rabbit hole. So I think what we have to start doing is going back to this demand issue. Why are so many people in this country trying to get high? Why are so many people in this country voluntarily addicting themselves to drugs? I
Mhm.
grew up in the 80s during the crack epidemic. I thought that after growing up seeing crackheads living on street corners and digging in dumpsters, this generation would know not to use drugs. There's something deeper in this country where we have this intersection of poverty, this intersection of hopelessness, this intersection of broken families and broken communities not having an opportunity that will tell somebody, look, I know that fentanyl might kill me, but it'll take away the pain I'm experiencing today, and that's why they're using it. So let's invest instead of trying to give more people the death penalty. Let's invest in saving more people's lives and keeping them off of drugs.
I want to thank you for having us on because I think Robert and I would both agree that if more like people like-minded like us that have different views but can talk civilly without screaming at each other and turning it into a free-for-all, that's how we're going to make progress because there's a lot of areas, even with our different points of view, agree on mental health, substance abuse. I would rather send somebody to treatment than send them to jail if it's going to make their life and the people around them better. And so I like the forum that you've set up for doing it this way. And I hope you have us on again because it's nice to be able to have a conversation with both views and not drown each other out.
We will
Thank
do,
you,
and
Robert.
we will do. Thank you to both of you, Rich Giardino and Robert Patillo. And I just do want to say, I think what's clear is that everyone wants a better country, a stronger country. And, some of us disagree on how to get there, but ultimately that's where everyone wants to go. And I think that's the point here, is that we can have these conversations and get to a better place as a country. So thank you both for coming on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.